A black trauma nurse, a Korean Mafia boss. One exhausted woman falls asleep on the wrong man on a midnight subway. And 2 days later, she rams a steel cart into an assassin to save his life. Now she's trapped inside a war she never chose, hunted by the most ruthless crime syndicate in North America, and falling for the most dangerous man she's ever met. Watch until the end. Hit like, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The train was almost empty. That was the thing Zuri Bennett would remember later, when everything had already gone wrong. Not the cold, not the exhaustion pulling at the backs of her eyes like fishhooks, but the emptiness of that car. The way the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered above a handful of strangers who couldn't be bothered to look at each other. The way Chicago's underground tunnels swallowed sound until there was nothing left but the grinding rhythm of wheels on iron track. It was 11:47 at night. She knew because she checked her phone the moment she sat down, calculating how many hours she had before her next shift started. The answer was not enough. It was never enough. Zuri was 31 years old, and she had been a trauma nurse for 6 years. And in those 6 years, she had learned that the human body could absorb an almost incomprehensible amount of punishment before it finally quit. She had believed that applied to her own body, too. She was reconsidering that tonight. Her feet hurt in the specific way that feet hurt after 14 hours on linoleum floors, a deep ache that had climbed past her ankles and settled somewhere behind her kneecaps. Her scrubs smelled like antiseptic and the faint copper ghost of someone else's blood. A 34-year-old who'd caught 2 rounds from a drive-by outside a laundromat on West Garfield. She'd kept him alive. She always kept them alive if there was any conceivable way to do it, and sometimes she kept them alive when there wasn't. That was what she did. That was the only thing about herself she'd never doubted. Everything else was a longer story. She pressed her shoulder against the window glass and felt the cold bleed through her jacket. Outside, the tunnel walls rushed past in a smear of gray and shadow. She closed her eyes for just a second, just to give them a rest. And her body did the thing it always did when she let her guard down. It folded. She didn't feel herself drift. One moment she was listening to the grind of the train, and the next there was warmth on her left side that hadn't been there before, and the particular sensation of weight that wasn't her own. She registered it distantly, the way you register sound in a dream, present but disconnected from consequence. She woke when the train lurched around a curve. Her head snapped up, her neck ached. She became aware, in the same terrible instant, of 2 things: that she had been asleep and that her head had been resting on someone's shoulder. She pulled back so fast she nearly knocked her bag into the aisle. "I am so sorry." The words came out before she was fully conscious, the automatic reflex of someone who'd spent her whole life apologizing for existing in spaces that didn't quite expect her. I'm sorry, I just got off a shift and I must have... It's fine." 2 words. Flat. Not dismissive exactly, but not warm either. Simply a statement of fact delivered by someone who had decided the matter was closed. She looked at him for the first time. He was sitting perfectly still in a way that most people simply did not sit. Not relaxed, not tense, but contained, like a blade in a sheath. He was Korean, maybe late 30s, with a face that was composed almost to the point of blankness, except for his eyes. His eyes were something else entirely. Dark and precise, the kind of eyes that cataloged everything they touched without revealing what they made of it. He was wearing a black cashmere coat that cost more than her monthly rent. She could tell that much. She could also tell that his hands, folded in his lap, had been through things that cashmere coats didn't usually witness. "Seriously," she said, because she was exhausted and embarrassed, and when she was embarrassed, she talked. "That was completely unprofessional of me. I don't normally just fall asleep on strangers." He looked at her. Not at the space near her face the way most people looked at her on trains, but directly at her, with a focus that was almost uncomfortable. "You work in medicine," he said. It wasn't a question. She glanced down at her scrubs, at the lanyard she'd forgotten to take off with her hospital ID still clipped to it. "Trauma nurse," she said. "Long day." "I can see that." There was nothing condescending in it. No pity. He said it the way he'd said everything else, as a simple observation about the state of the world. She found, to her slight surprise, that she didn't hate it. The train began to slow. She looked up at the stop indicator and felt a small flood of relief. Hers was next. "This is me," she said, gathering her bag. "Again, I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing." She paused with her bag halfway to her shoulder. Something in his voice had shifted. Not softer, exactly, but different. Like he meant it in a way that went past the moment. "Okay," she said, and she wasn't sure why those two words landed somewhere in her chest. The train stopped. She stood. She walked to the doors without looking back, stepped out onto the platform, and let the cold air of the Chicago winter hit her face like a hand. She didn't look back. She told herself that for a solid 30 seconds, and then she looked back. He was still sitting in the same position, perfectly still, watching the tunnel swallow the train ahead. He didn't look at her through the window. Or if he did, she couldn't tell. The train pulled away. Zuri stood on the platform for a moment longer than she needed to, then turned and walked toward the exit. She had 4 hours of sleep to collect. She had a double shift in 18 hours. She had a life that was small and disciplined and built on the single load-bearing pillar of her work. And she didn't have room in it for dark-eyed strangers and expensive coats. She did not think about him again. Mostly. The next 2 days were ordinary in the way that trauma medicine is never actually ordinary. 2 gunshot wounds, a construction accident that took 4 hours and every gram of focus she had, a teenager with a ruptured appendix who came in looking like he was just tired and nearly didn't leave at all. She moved through her shifts the way she always did, quick and precise, her brain locked onto whatever was directly in front of her, because that was the only way to survive this job without losing your mind. She ate bad vending machine food in the break room at 2 a.m. She argued with an attending physician about a patient's pain management protocol and won because she was usually right about these things, and she'd stopped pretending otherwise around year 3. She called her mother back in Atlanta and listened to 30 minutes of news about people she'd gone to high school with and agreed that yes, she should eat more, and no, she hadn't met anyone, and yes, she was fine. She was fine. She was always fine. The call came through at 6:14 on a Thursday evening. Zuri was finishing a chart at the nurse's station when the radio crackle from the ambulance bay announced an incoming gunshot victim, male, estimated late 30s, 2 rounds to the torso, vital signs unstable. She was already moving before the dispatcher finished talking, pulling on gloves as she walked, her mind shifting into the particular gear that trauma work required. The one that locked the door on every other part of yourself and put all available resources toward the single immediate problem. The ambulance rolled in at 6:19. She was at the bay doors when they opened. She processed the gurney first, the paramedics, the IV line, the oxygen mask, the blood pressure cuff reading numbers she didn't like. Standard intake. She was already identifying the wounds, calculating the sequence of necessary interventions, coordinating with the trauma resident who had appeared on her left. Then she saw his face. The recognition landed in her like ice water, sudden and total. The composed features, the precise dark eyes, open now and fixed on the trauma bay ceiling with the particular blankness of someone managing pain through sheer force of will. The cashmere coat was gone, replaced by a shirt that had been cut open by the paramedics and was dark with blood across the left side. It was the man from the train. She didn't stop moving. She didn't hesitate. She filed the recognition in a back drawer of her mind and did her job, which was the only appropriate response to the situation, and she was good at her job in the way that you are only good at something after you've spent years grinding yourself against it until every unnecessary thing falls away. 2 GSWs, entry wounds left chest and left flank, she called, directing the flow of the room. Get me a chest x-ray and a fast exam. I need a second large bore EIV. What's his BP? 84/50. Get me 2 units of O, negative, now. The room moved around her like a machine she was running. She cut away the rest of his shirt and pressed a gloved hand to the chest wound, applying pressure, feeling the vital feedback of a body that was still fighting. His eyes found her face. Something passed through them. Not relief, not recognition exactly, more like recalibration. "You're going to be okay," she said, and she said it the way she said it to everyone. Not a reassurance, but a statement of intent. A thing she was telling the universe as much as the patient. He said nothing. His jaw was set like a locked door. The trauma resident arrived and they worked fast and in concert, and somewhere in the organized chaos of the next 8 minutes, Zuri registered the presence of men at the bay doors. Large men in dark clothes who stood very still and watched the room with the kind of attention that had nothing to do with concern and everything to do with security. One of them caught her eye and held it, his expression communicating something she couldn't immediately decode. She didn't have time to decode it. She had a patient bleeding out in front of her. They moved him to the OR at 6:41. She handed him off to the surgical team and stepped back, pulling off her gloves, already turning toward the next thing, because there was always a next thing. Then she saw the other man. He was standing in the corridor outside the trauma bay, which was not where visitors stood. He was wearing a hospital orderly uniform that was slightly too small for his frame and slightly too new. The kind of new that meant it had been acquired recently for a specific purpose. He was holding a clipboard that he wasn't reading. He was looking at the door through which they'd just wheeled the patient. Something cold moved up the back of Zuri's neck. She'd worked in trauma medicine in a city with a gun violence rate that would have been a national crisis if anyone powerful enough to fix it had cared, and she had learned to read situations the way other people read text. Fast, instinctively, with accuracy born out of necessity. And what she was reading right now, in the posture and the eyes and the too new uniform of the man with the clipboard, was not an orderly. She watched him for 3 seconds. He reached into the clipboard and his hand came back with something that was not a pen. Zuri moved. She didn't decide to move. Her body made the decision independently, the same way it reached for a crash cart or covered a wound. Pure trained reflex directed by a threat assessment that bypassed conscious thought entirely. She grabbed the handle of the massive steel supply cart beside the nurse's station, the one loaded with sealed equipment packages and IV supplies and easily 200 pounds of hospital infrastructure, and she drove it down the corridor with every ounce of force her exhausted body had left. The cart hit the man in the orderly uniform at full speed, mid-torso, and the combined momentum of a steel cart and a determined trauma nurse carried him backward into the wall with a sound that was not gentle. The thing in his hand clattered away across the linoleum. He hit the floor. The corridor erupted. Someone was shouting. A nurse at the far end of the hall had pressed herself against the wall. One of the large men from the ambulance bay was already running toward her. No, running toward the man on the floor. And now there were more of them, materializing from positions she hadn't registered, and the corridor was suddenly full of controlled, violent motion. Zuri stood with her hands on the supply cart, breathing hard, looking down at the man she'd just put on the floor. He was conscious. He was not getting up. The thing he dropped was a syringe. Industrial gauge, unlabeled, the kind of thing that could push enough of the wrong substance into an IV line to stop a heart in 30 seconds. One of the large men reached her. He was young, Korean, with a face that was all sharp angles and controlled urgency. He put himself between her and the man on the floor and looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You need to come with us," he said. "I don't go anywhere with people who don't tell me who they are." A pause. Something shifted in his face, not quite respect, but in the neighborhood. "My name is Park Tae-sung," he said. "I work for the man you just saved, and the man you just put on that floor works for the people who are going to keep trying to kill him, which means they are now very interested in you." Zuri looked at him. She looked at the man on the floor. She looked at the syringe. "How interested?" she said. "Interested enough that staying in this building is no longer safe for you." Down the corridor, she could hear the distant wail of police sirens beginning to accumulate. Someone had called it in. Multiple someones, probably. The hospital's security system would have flagged the incident. In approximately 4 minutes, this corridor was going to be full of CPD officers. And after that, it was going to be full of questions. And after that, she looked at Park Tae-sung. "I need 5 minutes," she said. "You have 2. She went to her locker. She took her bag, her phone, her keys, and the emergency cash she kept folded inside her running shoes because she'd grown up in a household where you always had an exit. She changed out of her bloody scrubs in 45 seconds. She thought briefly about calling someone, her supervisor, her mother, anyone, and understood immediately that she had no idea what she would say. She met Park Tae-sung at the staff exit at the rear of the building. He had a car waiting, black, unremarkable, engine already running. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." She stood at the door of the car in the cold Chicago night, with the sirens getting louder behind her, and she understood with the clarity that exhaustion sometimes produces that she had already made her decision the moment she grabbed that supply cart. Maybe even before that. Maybe the moment she stepped off a train 2 nights ago and stood on a platform longer than she needed to. She got in the car. The door closed. The car pulled out of the alley and turned north, and behind them the hospital receded into the yellow grid of the city, and somewhere inside it, in an OR on the 4th floor, a man was on a table fighting to stay alive. A man she'd now saved twice without knowing his name. The compound was not what she expected. She'd built up some picture in her mind during the drive, 2.5 hours, northwest out of the city, through suburbs that thinned into country roads, and then onto a private lane that was unmarked and gated and lined with cameras she could see and probably more that she couldn't. She'd been expecting something aggressive, something that announced its own danger. Instead, the building at the end of the lane was a lake house, broad and low, its architecture clean and severe in the way of something that had been built to function first and impress second. The lake beyond it was black under a cloud-covered sky. The grounds were quiet. The security was everywhere once you knew what to look for, but it didn't announce itself. Park Tae-sung walked her inside without ceremony. A woman appeared, 50s, Korean, face like a closed cabinet, and showed Zuri to a room on the 2nd floor. Clean, spare. A window with a view of the lake and a lock on the door that she noted was designed to be used from the inside. "Someone will bring food," Tae-sung said from the doorway. "I don't want food. I want to know what is happening. In the morning, I want to know now." She turned from the window and looked at him directly, and she let him see the full weight of a woman who had been awake for 19 hours and had used her last available energy to ram a would-be assassin into a hospital wall and was therefore completely out of patience. "I don't know who your boss is. I don't know who those people were. I don't know why someone was going to put something in his IV, and I don't know what I'm doing in this building. So you are going to tell me something real right now, or I'm going to walk out of this room and find a phone." Tae-sung studied her for a moment. "His name is Jihun," he said. "He leads an organization called the Black Tiger Syndicate. The people who sent the man you stopped tonight belong to a rival organization called the Dragon Crown. They've been trying to kill him for 4 months. Tonight, they almost succeeded." She absorbed this. "And now they know who I am." "Yes. Because I stopped their man. Because of the hospital cameras, because of witnesses, because the Dragon Crown has people in places you wouldn't expect." He paused. "Your apartment was accessed 20 minutes after we left the hospital." The cold that moved through her was specific and anatomical. She felt it in her sternum first, then her hands. "Accessed," she said. "There was a team. They were looking for you." Another pause. "They left a message." She didn't ask what the message said. She could construct it from available data. "How long do I have to stay here?" she asked. "Until this is over." "And when will it be over?" Tae-sung's face did something complicated. "I don't know." She turned back to the window and looked at the black lake and the black sky and the place where they met and couldn't be distinguished from each other. "I want to see him," she said, "when he's stable enough. I want to see Jihun." "Why?" "Because I've saved his life twice, and I'd like to know why I bothered." He was moved to the compound's medical wing 26 hours after surgery. A team of people she never saw transferred him while she slept. The kind of sleep that is less like rest and more like the body simply shutting down out of necessity. She found out because Tae-sung knocked on her door at 7 in the morning and said the words, "He's asking for the nurse," with an expression that suggested he found this development personally inconvenient. The medical wing was in the basement, more clinical than she'd expected, better equipped than it had any right to be. The machines were good. The supplies were organized with the precision of someone who understood what they were for. She made a mental note about that and filed it away. Jihun was awake. He was sitting up at an angle that must have cost him significantly, because she could see in the set of his jaw and the controlled shallowness of his breath exactly what it was taking him not to show how much the movement hurt. He looked like a man engaged in a private argument with his own body, one he intended to win through sheer stubbornness. She checked his chart first. Someone had been maintaining it with decent competence. Then she checked his wounds, his vitals, his surgical notes. She was thorough and she was impersonal about it, because impersonal was safer for both of them, and she had a feeling that impersonal was a language he understood. He watched her work with those precise dark eyes and said nothing. When she was done, she straightened up and looked at him. "You're lucky," she said. "The round that hit your chest missed your heart by about 1.5 inches. The flank wound missed your kidney. You're going to have significant pain for the next 3 to 4 weeks, and you're going to want to push through it and do things you shouldn't, and that's going to be a problem. I'll manage." "I'm sure you think that." Something moved in his face, not quite amusement, the architecture of it. "You remember me," he said. It was not a question. "The train," she said. "Yes." A pause. He was watching her with the same quality of attention he'd had that night. Not invasive, but complete. Like he wasn't missing anything. "You saved my life tonight," he said. "I did my job." "That's not what saving my life was." She met his eyes. "What was it?" He didn't answer that directly. "You weren't afraid," he said instead. "I was terrified," she corrected, because she believed in accuracy. There's a difference between terrified and stopped by it. Something shifted in his face then. Something genuine and small, like a tell in a card game, there and gone before she could name it. "Taesung told me what you said to him last night," Jihun said, "that you wanted to know why you bothered. I still want to know." "And?" "You haven't told me yet." He studied her for a long moment. Outside the small window near the ceiling, the gray light of a February morning was trying to get through. "There's evidence," he said finally. "Documents, recordings. A federal prosecutor named in this city has been coordinating with the Dragon Crown for 18 months, helping them move money, helping them identify targets." He paused. "Helping them identify mine." Zuri kept her expression level. "What kind of evidence? The kind that would end careers, and more than careers." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Dragon Crown wants it destroyed. The prosecutor wants it destroyed. That's why they've been trying to kill me for 4 months. As long as I'm alive, the evidence is protected. As long as the evidence exists, neither of them can move freely. And where's this evidence? Safe. That's not the same answer I gave you," he said. "I know." She almost smiled. She stopped it. "So they'll keep trying," she said, "until they succeed, or until I end it." She looked at this man, this wounded, contained, dangerous man sitting upright in a hospital bed through what must have been an act of concentrated will, and she thought about the apartment she no longer had, and the team that had gone there looking for her, and the message they'd left that Taesung still hadn't told her the contents of. "How many people know about the evidence?" she asked. "Very few." "Who?" He looked at her for a moment. "Why?" "Because," she said, and she chose her words carefully, "in my experience, when someone has been trying to kill you for 4 months, and they know your exact location, and they know your surgical schedule, and they have a man in an orderly uniform ready to hit your IV line before you're out of recovery, that's not just rival intelligence. That's someone inside." The silence that followed was very specific. Jihun's eyes had gone flat and still. Not cold. Something more dangerous than cold, like water before it freezes. "Say that again," he said quietly. "You have a problem inside your own organization," Zuri said, "and I don't think you didn't know that. I think you knew it, and you didn't know who. And now you're looking at me because I'm an outsider, and I've got nothing to protect, and I might just tell you the truth." He held her gaze for a long time. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Nobody ever is," she said. "Get some rest. Your body is not as invincible as you seem to think it is, and if you tear those sutures, I'm going to be very irritated." She picked up the chart and walked out. Behind her, she heard him say her name. He must have gotten it from Taesung, and she stopped in the doorway without turning around. "Zuri." "What?" "Thank you." She stood there for a second, the chart in her hands, the gray morning light falling through a window somewhere above them. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "The hard part hasn't started." She walked down the corridor and up the stairs and back into the compound, and she stood at the window of her room and looked out at the frozen lake, and she understood in the clear, cold light of that morning that the man she'd left behind was not simply dangerous. He was in danger. And someone inside his own walls had put him there. And she was the only person in this building with nothing to lose, which meant she was the only one who could afford to look clearly at what was right in front of them. Her phone had no signal. The car that had brought her here was not available. And somewhere in this compound, someone was still feeding information to the people who wanted Kang Jihun dead. And they had just watched her walk out of his room, and they were already wondering how much she knew. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window and felt the lake wind trying to get in through the frame. She thought about the way he'd said her name. She thought about the message her apartment team had left and the things she still didn't know. And then Taesung knocked on her door, and his face, when she opened it, was the color of concrete, and he said 4 words that turned the morning into something else entirely. They found us. Again. They found us. Again. Taesung didn't wait for her to respond. He was already moving back down the corridor, one hand pressed to the earpiece nested against his jaw, the other resting on the weapon at his hip with the casual familiarity of someone who'd been doing that for years. Zuri grabbed her bag from the chair by the window. Pure reflex, the same reflex that made her keep emergency cash in her shoes, and followed him. The compound had changed in the 30 seconds since she'd opened her door. She felt it before she saw it. A shift in pressure, like a building bracing for impact. The men who'd been stationed at intervals along the corridor were moving with a different quality of purpose now, tighter, faster, their eyes scanning instead of resting. 2 of them were pulling on body armor at the far end of the hall. A third was on a radio, speaking Korean in short-clipped bursts that had the rhythm of people being positioned rather than informed. "How long do we have?" she asked Taesung's back. 20 minutes, maybe less. How did they find? Not now. She bit down on the follow-up question and kept pace with him. They went down 2 flights of stairs, moving away from the lake-facing side of the building and deeper into its core. She counted doors, noted turns, filed the layout of the place the way she filed anatomy. Not because she'd planned to, but because her brain was constitutionally incapable of moving through a space without mapping it. They reached the medical wing. Taesung pushed through the door, and she was right behind him. Jihun was already trying to sit up further. "Stop," she said, crossing the room in 5 steps and putting a hand on his shoulder, not gently, but with the specific firmness of clinical authority. "You move wrong, and you tear the chest repair, and then nobody's problems matter because you'll be dead in 4 minutes. He looked at her hand on his shoulder, then at her face. "They tracked a vehicle," he said to Taesung, ignoring her instruction in everything except the actual movement of his body, which he stopped. "The Tahoe we used last week." "I swept it," Taesung said. "Sweep it again." "It's already flagged. We're rotating now." A pause. "The outer team is repositioning. I've got Shinnon Park on the north gate, Cho on the access road." His voice was flat and operational, and Zuri could hear underneath it, like a frequency you feel in your back teeth, the particular tension of a man who was working hard not to show fear. "Who called it in?" Jihun asked. "Anonymous tip, CPD dispatch. Whoever called it was using our internal frequency." The room went quiet in a way that rooms go quiet when something important lands. Zuri looked at Jihun. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Taesung with an expression she couldn't fully read, but she could read enough. The muscles along his jaw had gone tight. His eyes had done the thing she'd seen before, that freezing water quality, still and terribly deep. "Our internal frequency," he said. "Yes." "Which 3 people have access to?" Taesung said nothing. "Taesung, I know what it means, Hyung." The word hung in the air between them. Korean, informal, the weight of years in it. Zuri stayed where she was and kept her mouth shut because she had the clinical wisdom to recognize when a conversation was not hers, and the human wisdom to know that interrupting it would cost her something. Jihun leaned back against the pillow. The movement was controlled. Everything about him was controlled, and the control itself was the tell. The amount of effort it took to maintain it. "Get me a secure line, Basid," he said. "Not the compound system." "I've got one." "Then use it. I want to know where Han Jae-won is right now." Taesung's expression shifted, almost too fast to catch, but Zuri caught it. Something tightened around his eyes, something that looked, if she was reading it right, less like surprise and more like confirmation. "I'll find out," he said, and left the room. The door closed. Zuri waited 3 seconds, then said, "Who is Han Jae-won?" Jihun turned his head and looked at her. "My chief of operations. One of the 3 people with access to your internal frequency." "Yes." "How long has he worked for you?" 9 years. She absorbed that. 9 years was a long time. Long enough to be trusted completely. Long enough if someone had turned to know exactly where to cut to cause the maximum damage. You suspected him, she said. I suspected the possibility of someone. I didn't have a name. But now you do. I have a direction. His voice was precise and uninflected. That's not the same thing. She pulled the stool from beside the monitoring equipment and sat down because her legs were tired and she didn't see any reason to perform steadiness that she wasn't feeling. The hospital, she said. The man in the orderly uniform. That was coordinated with your surgical schedule. Yes. Your surgical schedule was known to a small number of people. Yes. He watched her work through it. He didn't help her, and he didn't rush her, and she noticed that too. The patience of someone who understood that thinking out loud wasn't weakness, it was process. If it's Han, she said, how long has he been feeding them information? Long enough to make 4 months of attempts possible. And the evidence you mentioned, the prosecutor. Something moved behind his eyes. What about it? Does Han know where it is? A pause that lasted precisely long enough to tell her the answer before he gave it. He knows it exists. He doesn't know the location. You're sure? I'm sure of very little right now, Jihun said, and it was the most unguarded thing he'd said to her yet. The honesty of it landed oddly, like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading out further than you expected. She looked at him in the low light of the medical wing, this man with 2 surgical wounds and a compromised organization and an enemy using his own infrastructure against him. And she felt something she wasn't entirely prepared for. Not sympathy exactly, something more complicated. The particular feeling of recognizing a person who was used to being the strongest one in every room and was currently being forced to experience what it felt like when that wasn't enough. She knew that feeling. She'd known it her entire professional life. You need to sleep, she said. You need to sleep, she said again, with the tone she used on patients who thought willpower could substitute for physiology. Your body is 48 hours out of major surgery, and it is currently producing adrenaline it cannot afford to spend. In approximately 2 hours, you are going to crash, whether you want to or not. And if you're in the middle of a tactical decision when that happens, it's going to be a problem. So sleep now, while Tae-sung is working, and be useful later. He stared at her. You always talk to people like that? He said. Like what? Like they don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. That's the point. Something crossed his face. She'd seen versions of that expression on patients before. The ones who were used to running everything, who found it physically difficult to cede control even to the person trying to keep them alive. It usually took them a while to get there. Jihun got there faster than most. He closed his eyes. She sat on the stool and watched his breathing slow, and didn't examine too carefully why she stayed. The 20 minutes came and went without an assault. Whatever the Dragon Crown had planned, they pulled it back. Or the tip had been a probe, testing response patterns, logging what the compound did when it thought it was under threat. Zuri overheard enough of Tae-sung's radio traffic to piece that much together. The outer team found nothing on the access road, no vehicles, no movement in the tree line, which was, as she understood it, almost worse than finding something. She was in the kitchen. A large, clean, institutional space that felt like no one had ever cooked anything in it for pleasure. When Tae-sung found her, she was making coffee because there was coffee and she needed it, and she did not ask permission because she had stopped being a guest approximately 8 hours ago. Tae-sung sat down at the long table without being invited. She put a second cup in front of him without being asked. He stared at it for a moment. Han Jae-won is in Seoul, he said. Supposedly. He took a flight out 4 days ago. Supposedly. The flight manifest shows his name. His phone pinged a tower in Gangnam this morning. But Tae-sung wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. His hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. His daughter is here, he said. In Chicago. She goes to Northwestern. He didn't tell her he was leaving. Zuri considered this. He always tells her. He tells her everything. He raised her alone, after his wife died. Something shifted in Tae-sung's face. The operational flatness cracked briefly into something more human and more painful. Han Jae-won spent 9 years being the most loyal man in that room. He covered Jihun during the East Side incident in 2019. He took a round meant for him. A round. People change, Zuri said. Not like that. Not... He stopped, pressed his lips together. She understood what he was doing. He was trying to find the version of the story where the man he trusted hadn't done what the evidence suggested. She'd seen that exact struggle on the faces of family members in waiting rooms. The specific resistance of someone who loves a person trying to reconcile that love with a reality that couldn't be reconciled. Tae-sung, she said, if it's not Han, then who had access to that frequency? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said a name she didn't recognize. Yoon Sung-min, he said, our communications director. That's the third person. Yes. And where is Yoon Sung-min right now? Here, Tae-sung said, in this building. The silence that followed was very loud. Zuri set down her coffee cup. She thought about the layout she'd been mapping since she arrived. The corridors, the stairwells, the positions of the men she'd clocked at their posts. She thought about the probe that wasn't an assault, and what you learned from watching a compound mobilize, and how valuable that information would be to someone who was going to need to move through this building later. Does Jihun know Yoon is here? She asked. Yoon is always here. He runs compound communications. Tae-sung's voice was careful now, very careful. Does Jihun know that Yoon had access to the frequency? A pause. He knows 3 people had access. But he named Han. Han is the one who... He stopped again. Han is the one who makes more sense, Zuri said, because he's not here, because he's already across an ocean, because if you're going to suspect someone you love, it's easier to suspect the one you can't see. Tae-sung looked at her with an expression she'd earned and didn't entirely want. I need to talk to Jihun, she said. He's sleeping. Wake him up. The nurse is telling me to wake the patient she just put to sleep. The nurse is telling you that someone in this building may be using your communication system right now, and if Jihun is the only person with the authority to lock it down, then yes, wake him up. Tae-sung stood. He picked up his coffee, drained it in 2 swallows, and walked out of the kitchen without another word. She followed. Ma'am. Jihun had been asleep for 40 minutes. He came awake with a speed that was slightly unnerving. Not the slow surface breaking of normal sleep, but an immediate, total return to consciousness, eyes open and tracking before she'd finished saying his name. The involuntary response of someone who had been sleeping in dangerous places for long enough that his nervous system no longer allowed the luxury of gradual waking. She told him what she and Tae-sung had worked out. She kept it clinical and sequential, the way she presented a case. Here are the facts. Here is what the facts suggest. Here is what needs to happen next. She didn't editorialize, and she didn't cushion it, and she watched his face do something difficult and controlled while she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Yoon has been with me for 6 years, he said. I know. Han took a bullet for me. I know that too. The frequency access was supposed to be need to know. Someone decided they needed to know more than you wanted them to. His jaw tightened. He looked at the ceiling and she could see him running calculations behind his eyes. The kind of calculations that had nothing to do with numbers. The arithmetic of loyalty and betrayal, and the terrible math of figuring out which people in your life were real. I can't lock down communications without you knowing, he said. Can Tae-sung do it independently? Not without triggering a system alert that Yoon would see. Then you need to get Yoon out of the building first. Jihun looked at her. On what pretext? That's your department, she said. I just patch the holes. I don't make the cuts. A pause. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. The trace evidence of a man who had once, before years of this, known how to do that. Tae-sung, he said. Tae-sung, who had been standing near the door in the careful posture of a man trying to take up no space, straightened. Get Yoon to the vehicle bay. Tell him we need a secure line routed through the mobile unit. Tell him I want it in 20 minutes. And when he's there, keep him there. I don't care how. Tae-sung left. Zuri started to stand. Jihun said, Stay. She looked at him. Please, he said. The word cost him something. She could see it in the slight adjustment of his expression, the way a person looks when they use a word they've gotten out of the habit of using. She stayed. They sat in the quiet of the medical wing, and outside, somewhere above them, the compound went about the careful business of removing one of its own from the communication room, and the February lake pressed its cold against the windows, and Jihun told her things she hadn't asked to know. He told her about the Dragon Crown. Not their tactics, not their numbers, but what they'd taken from him. Specific things. A lieutenant he'd trusted since they were teenagers. A deal he'd built for 3 years that collapsed overnight when someone leaked the terms. A warehouse fire in Bridgeport that had killed 2 of his people, and that the fire marshal had called electrical, but that Jihun had known, immediately and with a certainty that lived below logic, was not electrical. He didn't tell her these things to explain himself. He told them the way someone reads a scar. Not as complaint, but as record. She listened. She didn't offer comfort because she didn't think he was asking for comfort, and she had a feeling that offering it would break something between them that she was only just beginning to understand. "Why nursing?" he asked at one point. The question was unexpected enough that she answered it honestly. "Because I grew up watching people not get helped," she said, "and I decided I could either be angry about it or I could be useful." "You chose useful." "I chose both," she said. I'm still angry. I just do something with it." He looked at her with an expression she'd been seeing more of. That quality of attention that wasn't romantic and wasn't clinical, but was something in between. The look of a person who is genuinely trying to understand another person and is surprised by the experience of wanting to. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Who?" "Someone who's been dead for 7 years." She didn't ask. He didn't offer. They let it sit. The compound alert came at 4:17 in the afternoon. Not the outer perimeter this time. Not a vehicle on the access road or a phone on an enemy frequency. Something closer. Something internal. The alert was from the server room, unauthorized access attempt on the encrypted file archive, the one where the most sensitive operational data was stored. The attempt had been made using a valid credential. The credential belonged to Han Jae-won, who was supposedly in Seoul, who had not been in contact with his daughter in 4 days. Taesung burst into the medical wing at a controlled run, which on him looked like walking very fast with intent to kill. He showed Jihun the screen of his tablet, and the two of them looked at it for exactly 4 seconds before Jihun said, in a voice that was absolutely level and therefore more frightening than shouting, "Find Han's access terminal. Find where in this building it was used from." "I know where it was used from," Taesung said. "Where?" "The communications room." Jihun's eyes went flat. "And where is Yoon right now?" "Vehicle bay. I've had eyes on him the whole time." Taesung's voice was careful and tight. "Hyung, someone used Han's credentials from Yoon's room. Either Han is here and Yoon let him in, or Yoon has Han's credentials." "Yes." "Which means Han may not have left on his own." The weight of what that implied settled into the room like something physical. Zuri felt it land. Not just the tactical consequence, but the personal one. The man who had taken a bullet for Jihun. The man who raised his daughter alone. The man who was supposedly in Seoul and whose credentials were being used from inside this building by someone who wasn't him. Jihun closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, the thing she'd seen behind them, the human arithmetic of loss, was locked away. What was left was something colder and more purposeful. "Secure Yoon," he said. "Now, don't explain, don't question him, just secure him." "And the server room?" "Lock it. Change every access credential, starting with mine." "If Yoon already sent something out, then he already sent it, and we deal with what comes. Move, Taesung." Taesung moved. Zuri sat very still on the stool and watched Jihun's face and understood that the careful architecture of his organization, the 9 years, the loyalty, the man who took a bullet, might have been housing something rotten for longer than anyone wanted to calculate. "Jihun," she said. He looked at her. "If they know this location, he said simply. "Then we can't stay here." "No." "How long before they move?" He thought for a moment. His hand rested on the edge of the medical cot, and she noticed, for the first time, that it was trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the sustained effort of a body being asked to function at operational capacity while it was still trying to close 2 surgical wounds. If Yoon sent a location ping, he said, they'll want to move at night. They'll want the confusion. He glanced at the small window near the ceiling. The light coming through it was gray and thinning. We have 4 hours. Maybe 5. And you can't be moved in 4 hours. Not safely. I've been moved less safely. That's not Zuri. He said her name with a particular weight, not a command, not a reassurance, something more honest than both. I know what I can and cannot survive. Tonight I may not have the luxury of choosing only what I can survive. She looked at him, this man who should have been horizontal and medicated and nowhere near a crisis of any kind, and felt something harden in her chest. Not resignation. The opposite. The specific hardening of a person who has decided that the situation in front of them is not acceptable and is beginning to calculate what can be done about it. The medical wing, she said slowly. What about it? Show me the floor plan. He studied her. Why? Because I am a trauma nurse, she said, and I have spent 6 years turning inadequate spaces into functional ones, and I would like to know what I have to work with. Something moved behind his eyes. Tae-sung, he called. Down the corridor, footsteps stopped. Get her the building schematics, Jihun said. All of them. A pause. Then, all of them. Jihun looked at Zuri. She looked back at him. All of them, he said. And somewhere above them, in the failing afternoon light, a car that belonged to a man named Yoon Sung-min sat in the vehicle bay with its engine cold, and in the communications room a server log showed an access attempt made with the credentials of a man who should have been on the other side of the world, and the lake outside the compound's windows had gone the color of a bruise, and night was coming faster than any of them were ready for. Tae-sung appeared in the doorway with a tablet and a look on his face that Zuri had learned, in the past 18 hours, meant the situation had just become significantly worse. Yoon is gone, he said. Jihun's head came up. He was in the vehicle bay. I had 2 men on him. Tae-sung's voice was flat and furious. He asked to use the bathroom. One of them walked him to it. A pause that lasted exactly long enough. The bathroom window was open. He was gone before they got the door down. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then Jihun said very quietly, the kind of quiet that has mass to it. He just told them exactly where we are, and the lights went out. The darkness was total and immediate. Not the gradual dimming of a power fluctuation. This was surgical. Every light in the compound, every monitor in the medical wing, every indicator on every piece of equipment extinguished in the same instant. The emergency generators, which should have kicked in within 4 seconds, did not kick in. Zuri knew this because she counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, nothing. They hit the generator, Tae-sung said from the doorway. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the thing underneath it, the specific quality of a man recalibrating under pressure. Someone cut it from outside. We have battery backup on the security cameras only. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Zuri was already moving in the dark. She'd mapped this room when she first arrived. Not deliberately, not as strategy, but because her brain did that in every room she worked in, filed exits and obstacles, and the placement of every surface against the possibility of needing to move fast without looking. Her hands found the supply cabinet. Her fingers found the emergency flashlight on the second shelf, exactly where it had been 12 hours ago. She clicked it on. The beam cut across Jihun's face. He was upright on the cot, both feet on the floor, and the effort that had cost him was visible in the tight set of his mouth, and the way his left hand was pressed flat against his ribs. Not clutching, just holding, the way you hold something you can't afford to drop. Can you stand? She asked. Yes. Don't lie to me. I can stand, he said, and the flatness of it told her it was true, or true enough. She crossed to him and got her shoulder under his left arm, the uninjured side, and felt the full weight of him shift against her. He was heavier than he looked, the density of someone who kept himself in serious physical condition, and the warmth of him through his shirt was higher than it should have been. She noted the fever without saying so. This was not the moment for that conversation. Tae-sung was already on the radio. The chatter coming back was fragmented. Voices cutting in and out, some in Korean, one in English, all of them carrying the compressed urgency of people dealing with things going wrong faster than anticipated. Northgate is breached, Tae-sung said. Shin's team is down. Down, not retreating, down. How many? Jihun asked. Unknown. At least 8, maybe more. They came in through the tree line. Tae-sung looked at Jihun with an expression that had passed through professional and come out the other side into something raw. We have maybe 12 minutes before they reach the main building. Where's Cho? Access road. He's pinned. Pull him back. I want everyone inside, defensive positions, sub-level corridor. Jihun's voice was the same. Flat, precise, operational. The fever didn't touch it. Whatever was happening to his body, he'd locked it in a separate room. The sub-level has 3 choke points. If we hold all 3, Hyung, Tae-sung's voice dropped. Just slightly. Just enough. We have 9 men left in this building. They have at least 8 outside and Cho's team pinned. If Yoon told them the layout, he told them the layout, then they know the choke points too. The silence was brief and absolute. Zuri listened to it and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not panic, she'd never been prone to panic, but the specific weight of a situation that had passed the point where competence alone was enough. The medical wing, she said. Both men looked at her. You said 12 minutes before they reached the main building, she said. Not 12 minutes before they reached the sub-level. Tae-sung stared at her. The sub-level is more defensible. The sub-level is where they'll expect you to go. She handed Jihun the flashlight and moved to the door, looking out into the corridor. You said Yoon knows the layout. He'll tell them the choke points. He'll tell them where to apply pressure. She turned back. The medical wing is below the sub-level. It's not on the standard building schematic. I checked the plans Tae-sung gave me. It was added during a renovation. Retrofit. Different contractor. A pause. It won't be on whatever Yoon gave them, she said. Jihun and Tae-sung looked at each other in the narrow beam of the flashlight, and something passed between them. Wordless. Fast. The shorthand of people who had worked together long enough that full sentences were optional. The oxygen stores, Jihun said slowly. He was looking at her, but he was also looking at something she couldn't see, running a calculation she wasn't privy to. 4 full tanks, she said. I inventoried everything when I first came down here. The electrical panel. In the utility alcove off the main room. It's on the backup circuit, not the primary, which means it still has power. Limited, but enough. Tae-sung made a sound that was not quite a word. The building's HVAC runs through the medical wing, she continued. The ductwork. I noticed the access panels when I was mapping the room. She paused. I don't know what you can do with that, but I know what I can do with oxygen, electrical current, and a sealed corridor. Jihun looked at her for a long moment. The flashlight made his face half shadow, half harsh white light, and in that light he looked like something that had been through considerable fire and was still standing through an argument with physics. Tell me, he said. She told him. It took 8 minutes to set it up, and all 8 of them were the kind of minutes that age you. Tae-sung pulled 3 men from the sub-level defense, the minimum Jihun would authorize, no more, and they worked in the dark with 2 flashlights and the suppressed urgency of people on a very specific clock. Zuri directed the placement with the same voice she used in the trauma bay, clipped and exact, no wasted syllables. Move that there. Run that line to here. Open that panel, not that one, the one to the left. No, further left. They listened. She noted, with some distant part of her brain, that they listened the way people listen to someone who clearly knew what they were doing, which had nothing to do with gender or age or the fact that she was the only person in the corridor without a weapon. Competence had a sound. People heard it. Jihun sat against the wall in the main room of the medical wing and watched and said nothing, which was itself a form of permission. The compound above them was not quiet. She could hear it. Boots on floors, the distant crash of a door coming in, a burst of radio static, and then something she filed away carefully and did not let herself react to in the moment. Gunfire. Not close, not yet, but present and real and getting less distant by small increments. We need to move, Tae-sung said at 9 minutes. 30 more seconds, she said. We don't... 30 seconds. He gave her 30 seconds because Jihun had not contradicted her, and Tae-sung was, underneath everything, a man who trusted his commanding officer's judgment, even when it currently resided in a trauma nurse with a flashlight and her hands inside an electrical panel. She made the last connection, stepped back, looked at what she'd built. It was not elegant. It was not the kind of thing anyone had taught her, not in nursing school, not in 6 years of trauma medicine. It was built from the particular knowledge of a person who had grown up in a neighborhood where infrastructure failed regularly, and you learned to understand the bones of the buildings around you because sometimes knowing how something worked was the only leverage you had. She had been underestimated her entire professional life. Men in expensive coats, attending physicians with their hands already on the prescription pad, hospital administrators who called her aggressive when she fought for patients. She had learned to let people underestimate her, and she had learned to save the correction for when it mattered most. This mattered most. "Back corridor," she said, "all the way to the end, and seal the door behind us." They heard the assault team breach the sublevel at 11 minutes. The sound traveled through the building's bones, the impact of a door blown off its frame, the coordinated movement of multiple people entering a space fast and low. She counted the boots she could hear. More than 8. She'd been right about that. They'd underestimated the number outside. Jihun was beside her in the back corridor, his back against the concrete wall, and she could feel the heat coming off him in waves. The fever was climbing. She could do nothing about that right now, so she didn't spend energy on it. Taesung had his weapon up. The 2 other men flanking them were similarly positioned. Still, focused. The coiled readiness of people who had trained for this and were currently discovering the difference between training and the real thing. They could hear voices now, Korean, which she couldn't follow. Taesung's jaw tightened as he listened. "They're in the main corridor," he murmured, "looking for the medical wing." "Let them find it," Zuri said. A pause. "Let them find the door," she said. The door at the far end of the medical wing's main room, the one they'd sealed behind them, the one they'd rigged, was a standard fire door, reinforced, coded. It would take time to breach. It would bring everyone at once, stacked in the corridor, moving fast. Exactly what she'd needed. Taesung looked at her. She held up her phone, the trigger she'd wired to the circuit, a simple enough mechanism for someone who understood what she was working with. "When I say," she said. They waited. She could hear them on the other side of the door now. Not just footsteps, but voices. The sounds of people who had expected a defensive position and found instead a locked room and were deciding what to make of it. A radio transmission, a brief argument that she couldn't understand but Taesung could because she saw his expression shift. "They're calling it in," he said quietly. "Confirming the medical wing location. Confirming," which meant someone on the other end of that radio had given it to them. "They're going to breach," Taesung said. "I know," she said. "Let them start." The sound of the breach tool hitting the door frame was loud and concrete and real. 1 impact. 2. She pressed the trigger. The detonation was not a movie explosion, not a fireball, not a dramatic column of flame. It was fast and percussive and enormously loud. A compression wave that hit the door and the corridor beyond it, and the people stacked in that corridor with the blunt physics of what happens when oxygen, an electrical arc, and the specific layout of an enclosed space all participate in the same event at the same time. The door blew outward. The corridor went silent. Zuri was already moving before the echo finished. Not toward the door, but further down the back corridor, one hand on Jihun's arm, moving him. Taesung and the others were right behind her. She could feel the heat from the main room even through the sealed section, a wall of warmth that meant the device had done what she'd designed it to do. They reached the utility exit at the end of the back corridor, a maintenance door she'd found in the building schematics, unmarked, designed for HVAC access. Taesung hit it with his shoulder, and they came out into the cold. The February air hit her like a clean slap. For a moment she just breathed it, the cold, the night, the smell of the lake. Above them, on the second floor, she could see light moving through a window. Flashlights, the sweep of people clearing rooms that were empty. Taesung got them moving, around the building's north face, away from the access road, toward the water. She kept pace with Jihun, one hand on his arm, monitoring without appearing to monitor. His gait, his breathing, the quality of his weight against her. He was deteriorating, she could feel it. They reached the dock. There was a boat. She hadn't known about the boat, but Taesung apparently had. A rigid inflatable with a motor tied at the far end. One of the other men got it started. The sound of the motor was very loud in the lake silence, and she watched Tae-sung register that and accept it, because there was no version of this that was quiet. She got Jihun onto the boat. He sat heavily. His hand went back to his ribs. "You're bleeding," she said, close to his ear so Tae-sung wouldn't hear. "I know." "How long?" "Since the corridor." She pulled back his jacket. In the dim light from Tae-sung's flashlight, she could see the dark stain spreading through his shirt on the left side. One of the sutures had torn. The movement, the tension, the fever burning through whatever reserves his body had left. She pressed her hand against it. He made no sound. The boat pulled away from the dock. Behind them, the compound windows were lit with moving flashlights. She could see figures on the shore. One of them raised a radio. "They'll call it in," she said to Tae-sung. "I know. We have maybe 6 minutes before they have eyes on the water." "Where are we going?" He looked at his phone. "Safe house, Lakeshore, north of Waukegan, 40 minutes by water." "He doesn't have 40 minutes, she said quietly. Tae-sung looked at Jihun. He looked at her hand against Jihun's ribs, at the dark spreading stain under her palm. "What do you need?" he said. "Everything in that bag." She'd grabbed the medical kit on the way out of the wing, reflex, the same reflex that made her keep emergency cash. She said this to Tae-sung with her eyes. "He has 40 minutes because I will make him have 40 minutes. Not because it is likely, but because I have decided it." Tae-sung handed her the bag without another word. She worked on the water, in the cold and the dark, with the motor beneath them, and the shore lights getting smaller behind them, and Jihun's breathing doing something she didn't like. She packed the wound and applied pressure and talked to him. Not reassurance, but the ongoing stream of clinical narration she used on trauma patients, because it kept them present, gave them something to track other than pain. "Stay with me," she said. Not sweetly. The same way she said it in the trauma bay, as instruction. "I'm here," he said. His voice was different, lower, the edges less controlled. "Tell me something, anything, keep talking." A pause, the motor, the water. "Han," he said. She looked up from the wound. In the faint light she could see his face. The color was wrong. The composition altered in the particular way that blood loss altered things, the sharp precision of his features going slightly soft at the edges. "If he didn't leave on his own," Jihun said, "if Yoon had his credentials, don't think about that right now. If Yoon took his credentials," his voice was slower now, each word deliberate, "then Han didn't give them up, which means Yoon took them from him." A pause. "Which means Han—" He stopped. She kept pressure on the wound. She looked at him in the dark and she understood what he was working through. The arithmetic she'd run herself, 20 minutes ago, and had not wanted to finish. "Jihun," she said. "Han didn't leave," he said. "Yoon made it look like he left. The Seoul flight, the phone tower ping. Yoon runs communications. He could manufacture all of it." His jaw moved. Han's daughter called every day. Han never missed it. 4 days of silence. Another pause, slower. "Han's not in Seoul." The cold of the lake seemed to intensify. "Where is he?" she said, though she was beginning to understand the answer. "Wherever Yoon put him," Jihun said, and his voice had gone somewhere dark and quiet and certain. Yoon needed Han's credentials, and he needed Han unable to contradict the cover story. The only way to guarantee both is— He stopped himself. He looked at the water. She kept her hand on his side and felt his breathing shift. Not just the physical change of blood loss, but the other kind. The specific change of a person absorbing something that cannot be taken back. "He might still be—" she started. "Don't," Jihun said. Quiet. Absolute. "Don't." She didn't. The boat ran north on the dark water and the shore lights were gone now, the compound invisible behind them, and ahead there was nothing but the black of the lake and the black of the sky and the thin smear of lights along the distant Illinois shoreline. Tae-sung was watching her work from the bow, one hand on the radio, his face doing something she recognized now, the same thing Jihun's face had done when she told him about the frequency breach. The specific expression of a person who is restructuring the last 9 years of their life around a new and terrible piece of information. Han Jae-won, who had worked beside both of them for 9 years, who had taken a bullet, who had a daughter at Northwestern he called every single day, who had not called in 4 days, who was not in Seoul. She pressed harder on the wound and Jihun's hand closed around her wrist. Not to stop her, just to hold on to something, and she let him, and she felt the tremor in his fingers that his face was refusing to show. "When we get to the safe house," he said. "When we get there," she said. "The evidence." His grip on her wrist tightened slightly. "I need you to understand something. Tell me later." "Zuri." Her name in his mouth, the way he said it, not a command this time, something smaller and more serious than a command. "If I don't make it to the safe house, stop. Listen to me." The low voice had an edge under it now, not anger, urgency. "The evidence is stored digitally, encrypted. There's a physical key, a drive, that decrypts the access file. Without it, the digital files are noise." He paused. Han was the only other person who knew where the drive is. She stared at him. "Han," she said carefully, "who may not be alive." "Yes." "So, if he's gone, then there is no evidence," Jihun said. "And without the evidence, the prosecutor walks. The Dragon Crown walks. Everything I have spent the last 4 months surviving for—" His voice stopped. Just for a moment, just long enough to reveal the depth of what was under it. Gone. The motor ran beneath them. Taesung had gone very still at the bow. She looked down at her hand against Jihun's side, at the blood dark against her palm, at this man who had just discovered in the span of 40 minutes that his organization had been gutted from the inside, that a man who loved him was likely dead because of it, and that the thing he'd been protecting, the one thing that made survival mean something, might already be lost. She looked at him and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not pity, not the clinical compassion she'd trained herself to offer uniformly, regardless of circumstance. Something that didn't have a clean professional name. Something that lived in the part of her that had watched her father work 60-hour weeks in a city that didn't see him, that had spent 6 years fighting for patients in a system that processed them, that had spent her whole life in rooms that assumed she couldn't do what she knew she could. The feeling of recognizing someone who was carrying something too heavy and had been carrying it alone for so long they didn't know anymore what it felt like not to. "Where's the drive?" she asked. He looked at her. "You said Han was the only other person who knew. I'm asking where it is." A long pause. The water under them. The motor. "Jihun." Her voice was steady. "Where's the drive?" He held her gaze in the dark for a moment that stretched longer than moments usually stretched. She could see him calculating, not tactics, not operations, but something more personal and more difficult. The calculation of whether to trust a person who had, in 72 hours, saved his life twice and had not yet given him a single reason not to. "It's not at the compound," he said. "Where?" "Chicago," he said. "Downtown. A safety deposit box at a private vault on Michigan Avenue." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. The movement cost him, she saw it in the clench of his jaw, and withdrew a small flat key on a plain steel ring. He held it out to her. "Box number is on the key. The vault is under a shell company name, Hyon Asset Management. You tell them that name, they ask for a secondary passphrase." She took the key. It was cold from being against him, and then warm from his hand. "What's the passphrase?" she said. He told her. She closed her fingers around the key. "This doesn't mean you're not making it to the safe house," she said. "No," he said. "It doesn't mean that." But they both understood what it meant. What he'd just done. A man who trusted no one, who had built an organization on controlled information and need to know and the careful management of what each person could access, that man had just handed her the only remaining piece of the thing he'd been willing to die for. Not because he'd run out of options, because he'd decided she was one. The shore lights of Waukegan were beginning to resolve out of the dark ahead of them. Taesung spoke quietly into his radio. The motor ran. Jihun's breathing was shallow and too fast, and she kept her hand on his side and felt his pulse under her fingers, irregular and working hard. And she thought about a key on a steel ring and a passphrase and a box in a vault, in a city that was currently full of people who wanted this man dead. She thought about the drive inside that box. She thought about a federal prosecutor who was still sleeping soundly in whatever house prosecutors slept in, who had spent 18 months helping a criminal organization eliminate its competition, who was currently counting on the destruction of the only evidence that could touch him. She closed her fist tighter around the key. The boat touched the dock at Waukegan at 11:43 at night, and two of Tae-sung's men were waiting on the dock, and she got Jihun onto solid ground and kept him standing through what she could read in his body was a significant effort of will, and Tae-sung said quietly from behind her, "We have a problem." And she said, without turning around, "Which one?" Because at this point there were several candidates, and Tae-sung said, "The safe house. Someone called ahead." She turned. His face in the dock lights was the color of concrete, and his eyes had the look of a man who has just watched the last exit close. "Yun," she said. "Has to be," Tae-sung said. "Which means they know we're here. Which means we have maybe 20 minutes before they're on us." Tae-sung finished the sentence he'd started on the boat, and it landed on the dock like something dropped from a height. The two men waiting there, Cho and another she'd learned was named Baek, were already scanning the tree line behind the safe house with the particular stillness of people who understood that stillness was currently the only thing keeping them alive. Zuri looked at the safe house. Low building, single story, set back from the water behind a screen of bare winter trees, dark windows. No movement inside. She counted the distance from the dock to the building. 40 meters, open ground, frozen grass, a gravel path that would announce every footstep. "Is it already compromised?" she asked. "We don't know," Tae-sung said. Cho's team approached from the roadside. Nothing visible, no vehicles. But if Yoon called it in, how long ago could he have called it? From when he went out the bathroom window? 2 hours, maybe 2.5. So they had time to set up. Yes. Or, she said, they're still en route. Yoon ran. He didn't have a vehicle at the compound. I didn't see one in the bay that wasn't accounted for. He had to get to a phone, make contact, wait for someone to relay. Tae-sung processed this. That buys us maybe nothing, maybe 15 minutes. She turned to look at Jihun, who was standing on the dock under his own power by an act of sustained will that she found simultaneously impressive and alarming. "We can't go in blind, and we can't stand on this dock." "Agreed on both," Jihun said. His voice had the texture of gravel now. Low, abraded, stripped of the precision she'd come to associate with him. The fever was doing that. She could see the glaze behind his eyes that he was working to clear by focusing, the way you focus on a fixed point when a room is moving. "Cho," Tae-sung said. Cho, a compact man in his 40s with a face that looked like it had been broken and reset at least twice, moved without being given further instruction, angling toward the building from the north side, using the tree line as cover. Beck mirrored him on the south. They moved well, quietly. She noted that and said nothing. "Supply question," she said to Tae-sung. "What's in the safe house?" "Weapons, obviously. Clean phones. Cash. There's a vehicle in the garage." "Medical supplies?" "Basic kit. Maybe more, I don't know what rotation left." "He needs antibiotics," she said, low enough that Jihun could hear, but presented as clinical fact rather than alarm. "The fever is over 102. The wound site is showing early signs of infection, and the torn suture needs to be properly closed. If I can get him stabilized for 6 hours..." "We may not have 6 hours," Tae-sung said. "4 then." "We may not..." "Tae-sung." Her voice was quiet and flat. "I am telling you what his body requires. You tell me what the situation allows. We negotiate from there." He looked at her, then at Jihun. Jihun, who had been listening to this exchange about his own body with an expression that suggested he found it both necessary and faintly undignified, gave Tae-sung a single short nod. Tae-sung's radio clicked twice. Cho's signal. Building clear. "Move," Tae-sung said. The safe house smelled like closed air and gun oil. She got Jihun through the door and onto the couch in the main room while Tae-sung and Baek did a proper sweep. Cho covered the dock-facing window. She found the medical kit under the kitchen sink. Better stocked than she'd feared, not as good as she needed. Antibiotics, yes. Surgical thread. Saline. Gauze. A blood pressure cuff that read numbers she didn't share with anyone. She worked fast. She'd gotten good at fast. 6 years of trauma medicine had compressed her sense of what was possible in a short amount of time. How much intervention you could pack into 90 seconds, how much you could assess with your hands in 30. She cleaned the wound site, which made Jihun's jaw go hard and his breathing go short, and she reseated the torn suture with the focused economy of someone who had done this in worse conditions on worse surfaces. "You can make a sound," she said, threatening. "I won't report it." "I'm fine," he said. "You're not fine. You're functional. There's a difference." A pause. The needle. His breathing, measured and deliberate. "You always make that distinction," he said. "Yes. Fine and functional. Most people confuse them," she said. "Fine is a feeling. Functional is a condition. You can be one without the other." She tied off the suture. "You've been functional for years. I'm not sure when you were last fine." He was quiet for a moment. "That's—" He paused. "Accurate." She pressed a clean dressing over the site and taped it. His temperature read 103 under her palm. She didn't need the thermometer anymore. She was reading it through his skin. She pushed fluids into the IV she'd managed to set with a bag from the kit and started the antibiotics, and then she sat back on her heels on the floor beside the couch and looked at him and let herself, for the first time in hours, actually look at him. He looked like a man at the edge of his available resources. She understood the feeling precisely. "The drive," she said. His eyes found hers. "The vault on Michigan Avenue. I need to know everything about the access protocol. Not just what you told me on the boat. All of it. Floor layout if you know it. Staff pattern if you've been there. Security measures." She held up the key. "Because if something happens to you before this ends, I need to be able to get in there alone." He studied her for a long moment. Outside, the wind off the lake moved through the bare trees, and the windows creaked with it. Somewhere in the building, Tae-sung was talking in low, rapid Korean on one of the clean phones. "You'd go in alone," Jihun said. "If I had to. To recover evidence against a federal prosecutor. For a man you met 4 days ago on a train. I recovered it for the 34-year-old who came into my trauma bay with 2 rounds in him last year," she said, "and the 17-year-old with the kitchen knife wound the week before that, and every other person in this city who is living inside the consequences of a system that has people like that prosecutor in it." She met his eyes steadily. "You're a complicated case, Jihun. You're not exactly a victim and you're not exactly innocent. But the prosecutor and the Dragon Crown are running a protection racket on a federal level, and people die because of it every day who never made any of the choices you made." She paused. "So, yes, I'd go in alone." He held her gaze for a moment that had weight to it. Then he told her everything she'd asked for. Tae-sung came into the room at the end of it with the expression she'd learned to read as the situation has changed and not in a direction anyone is going to like. "What?" she said before he could open his mouth. "I made contact with 2 of our people who weren't at the compound tonight." He sat down in the chair across from the couch, forward-leaning, elbows on knees. "They've been running independent surveillance on Dragon Crown for the past 72 hours. Off-grid. Jihun standing order for a situation like this." He looked at Jihun. "Choi Min-seok is moving." The name. She'd heard it before. Not here, but in the outline of what she'd been told. The boss of the Dragon Crown. The top of the organization that had been trying to kill Jihun for 4 months. "Moving where?" Jihun said. "He's coming in personally." Tae-sung's voice was very flat. "He flew in from New York 2 hours ago. He's in Chicago now. Our people tracked him to a location on the south waterfront, an old shipping terminal off the industrial canal. He's coordinating the final push himself," Jihun said. "That's what it looks like. He brought 12 men off the plane. He's got more locally." A pause. "He's also meeting with someone." "Who?" "Our people got partial surveillance. They couldn't confirm identity, but the vehicle that arrived, the plates traced to a security service known to operate for certain federal—" "The prosecutor," Zuri said. Tae-sung looked at her. "It's unconfirmed." "It's the only person it makes sense to be," she said. "Min-seok is trying to close this tonight. The prosecutor knows that as long as the evidence exists, so does his exposure. They're coordinating the final move." She looked at Jihun. "They think you're running. They think the compound assault scattered you. They think you're wounded and disorganized and that tonight is the easiest window they'll ever have." Jihun said nothing. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man performing a calculation he hadn't yet finished. "Hyung," Taesung said quietly. We have 9 men total, including the 2 who just made contact, against at least 20, probably more, in a location they control. He let that sit. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I'm thinking, Jihun said, that they're right. Tonight is their best window. He brought his gaze down from the ceiling, and it landed with the particular weight it always landed with. Precise, total, a little bit frightening. Which means it's also ours. The room was very quiet. You can't, Taesung said. I can't stay here either. Jihun pushed himself upright on the couch. Slowly, the sutures holding, the IV line pulling taut until Zuri reached up and adjusted it. If they know this location, we have minutes, not hours. And if Min Seok and the prosecutor are together in one location right now, that is not a circumstance that repeats itself. He looked at Taesung directly. You know that. Taesung's jaw worked. He looked at his hands. He looked at the floor. He was doing the arithmetic that Zuri had watched him do since she'd met him. The arithmetic of loyalty against probability, of what he'd been willing to accept versus what the situation was now asking him to accept. The drive, Taesung said finally, looking at Zuri. I know where it is, she said. If Jihun goes to that terminal, I know, she said. Someone needs to get to Michigan Avenue before any of this happens. If something goes wrong at the terminal and we lose the evidence, I know, Taesung. He looked at her for a moment, then at Jihun. The look that passed between the 2 men was the kind that happened only between people who had, over years, developed a language that didn't require words. Take Bake, Jihun said to her. He knows Chicago. He'll get you to Michigan Avenue and wait. And then? Then you wait for my call on the clean phone. He reached into his jacket, the movement costing him less than it had an hour ago. The antibiotics, the fluids, her work, buying him back increments of function he shouldn't have had. He held out the phone. If you don't hear from me by 2 in the morning, I'll hear from you, she said. Zuri, I'll hear from you, she said again, and she said it the way she said things in the trauma bay. Not as comfort, but as declaration. A thing she was putting into the world as fact. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, something genuine and unguarded that she was becoming able to recognize now, the small seismic events that happened under the controlled surface. He reached up and closed his hand around hers where she held the phone. Whatever happens tonight, he said. Don't, she said. I need to say it. Say it when it's over. His hand tightened briefly on hers, then released. She stood. She pulled her jacket on. She looked at Taesung, who was already on the radio coordinating the other 2 men, his voice back to its operational register, the human arithmetic tucked away again behind the professional face. She looked at Jihun one more time. He was watching her with those dark, precise eyes in the low light of the safe house. His color still wrong, his breathing still careful, and he looked like a man who had decided something, not about tonight, but about something longer and less certain than tonight, and was keeping it to himself until the world gave him room to say it. She walked out. Beck drove like he'd grown up inside a vehicle, which she suspected was not far from the truth. He took them north from Waukegan and then back south into the city on routes she didn't recognize, checking the mirrors with the systematic regularity of someone running a counter-surveillance pattern without being asked to. She sat in the passenger seat with the key in her closed fist and the clean phone on her knee and watched the Chicago outskirts give way to the city proper. Michigan Avenue at 1 in the morning was not empty. It was never empty, but it was thin. The vault building was set back from the main strip, discreet, the kind of building that didn't advertise itself because its clients didn't want advertising. Dark granite facade, a single unmarked door, a camera above it that she only identified because Jihun had described exactly where it was. Stay with the car, she said to Beck. Jihun said, I know what he said. I'm going in alone because 2 people don't look like one person with a legitimate reason to be here at 1 in the morning. She looked at him. Stay with the car. He didn't argue. She got out. The door opened to a buzzer system. She gave the shell company name, Hyun Asset Management, to an intercom that conveyed it to a human she couldn't see. The secondary passphrase was requested. She gave it. There was a pause of approximately 20 seconds that she spent in the kind of stillness she'd learned to access in the trauma bay, the deliberate quieting of everything that wasn't immediately useful. The door opened. The interior was the kind of clean that money bought. Marble floors, low lighting, a man at a desk who looked at her with the practiced neutrality of someone paid to see everything and register nothing. He led her to a private room without conversation, placed a box on the table, and withdrew. She opened the box with the key. The drive was there. Smaller than she'd expected, Jay. The size of her thumb, matte black, unremarkable. She held it in her palm for a moment and felt the specific weight of something that carried more consequence than its physical mass had any right to suggest. Months of trying to kill a man for this. A loyal lieutenant likely dead for this. An organization gutted from within for this. She closed her fingers around it. Her phone buzzed. Not the clean phone. Her personal phone, which still had the original SIM, which meant she looked at the screen. The number was one she didn't recognize. She answered it because every instinct she had told her to answer it. Ms. Bennett. The voice was male, measured, the cadence of someone who chose words deliberately. Not Korean. American, Midwestern, the polished accent of education and careful self-construction. "Who is this?" she said. "Someone who knows where you are right now," the voice said, "and what you're holding." She kept her face still and her voice level. "I'm going to need more than that." "My name doesn't matter," the voice said. "What matters is that you are currently in possession of material that is going to be very difficult for a great many people if it reaches the wrong hands. I'd like to discuss an arrangement." She said nothing. "You're a nurse, Ms. Bennett. You save lives. You're not part of this world, and you don't have to be. Put the drive back in the box. Walk out of the building. Go home. Or go wherever home is now. I understand your apartment had an incident." A pause, smooth and deliberate. "You walk away and everything that has happened in the past 4 days becomes someone else's problem." "And Kang Jihun?" A brief silence. "That situation will resolve itself." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm authorized to give you." She looked at the drive in her palm. She thought about a man in a safe house with a fever of 103 who had handed her the only remaining piece of the thing that made survival mean something. She thought about a 34-year-old on a gurney in her trauma bay who'd caught 2 rounds outside a laundromat. She thought about every patient she'd ever pulled back from the edge in a system that put them in harm's way, and then spent its infrastructure on people like the voice on the phone. "No," she said. A pause. The kind of pause that recalibrates. "Ms. Bennett, I said no." Her voice was quiet, and she let it be quiet, because quiet was more final than loud. "You're going to want to stop calling this number." She ended the call. She put the drive in the interior pocket of her jacket against her ribs. She picked up the clean phone. She walked out of the private room, through the marble lobby, out the door, and into the cold Michigan Avenue night. Beck was at the curb. His window was down. His face, when he saw her expression, went from neutral to alert in the time it takes to blink. "Someone called my personal phone," she said, getting in. "They knew I was here." "How?" "I don't know. But they had a number that's registered in my name, which means they have resources I didn't account for." She looked at him. "Can they track the phone?" "Possibly." She opened the window and dropped it in a trash can as they pulled away from the curb. "Clean phone only," she said. Beck nodded, already navigating south. The clean phone had 1 number in it. She looked at it for a moment, doing the math. Jihun had said 2 in the morning. It was 1:17. If they'd reached the terminal by now, if the approach had gone undetected, if Tae-sung's 9 men against 20+ hadn't already, she stopped that line of thought. She was good at stopping lines of thought that weren't useful. She'd had practice. The phone buzzed in her hand. She answered it before the first ring finished. "It's Tae-sung," said the voice. "We're at the terminal." A pause, and under his voice she could hear, faint, distance compressed, the sound of something that might have been movement or might have been the beginning of something louder. "Jihun needs you to know the prosecutor is confirmed. He's here, in the building with Min Seok." "I know," she said. "Someone called my personal phone 15 minutes ago." A silence that was very loud. "Your personal." They knew I was at the vault. which means they have a line into somewhere they shouldn't. Her jaw tightened. Is Jihun with you? He's at the south entry. We go in 3 minutes. Taesung, I know. He is not physically capable of. I know, Taesung said, and his voice had the same quality it had when he'd said Han Jae-won's name back at the compound, the quality of a man who knows a thing and cannot change it. He knows it too. He went anyway. She pressed her hand flat against her jacket, against the drive underneath it, against her own ribs. Get me there, she said to Beck. The terminal is, I know where it is. Jihun told me everything about it, including 3 access points that his people may not know about because they were added in a port renovation 2 years ago. She looked at the road ahead. Get me there now. Beck looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he ran a red light on Michigan Avenue and pointed the car south toward the industrial waterfront, and the city blurred past the windows in streaks of yellow and white. And somewhere ahead of them, a man with a fever and 2 surgical wounds and 9 men was walking into a shipping terminal to finish a war that had taken everything from him except the thing that mattered most. The car accelerated. Her hand pressed the drive against her ribs. She felt her own heartbeat under her palm, fast and certain, and she thought about what Jihun had said on the boat. Whatever happens tonight. And the way she'd stopped him, and the things she hadn't let him finish, and she thought, not tonight, not him. Not if she had anything to do with it. Beck took a hard turn onto the lakefront expressway, and the terminal's industrial silhouette appeared ahead against the black water. And inside it, she knew, the last pieces of 4 months of war were falling toward each other at speed. And she counted the blocks remaining between her and the entrance she'd memorized from Jihun's description. And she was out of the car before Baek had fully stopped it, moving fast across wet concrete toward the service entrance on the east face of the building. The one that didn't appear on the Dragon Crown's intelligence because it had been added 2 years ago in a renovation that nobody who wasn't looking for it would think to look for. The door was unlocked. She pushed through into the dark interior of the terminal, and the sound that hit her was not the controlled silence she'd hoped for, but the compressed, violent sound of a confrontation already in. The interior of the terminal was vast and half dark, and smelled like rust and lake water and something chemical underneath both of those. The ghost of industrial use that never fully left a building no matter how long it sat empty. She moved along the east wall with her hand against the corrugated steel, using it as a guide, letting her eyes adjust. The sound ahead of her was specific and terrible. Not the chaos of a full firefight, but the compressed violence of close-quarters confrontation, bodies moving fast in a confined space, the sharp impacts of people doing serious damage to each other at short range. She'd heard versions of it before. Not often. Enough. She counted the seconds it took her eyes to pull shapes from the dark. 40 feet ahead, the terminal opened into its main floor. A cavernous space with a concrete floor stained by decades of cargo traffic, the ceiling lost somewhere in the darkness above structural steel beams. Crates, old equipment, the rusted hulks of loading machinery arranged in a geography that created corridors and blind spots and the particular tactical landscape of a place that had never been designed for what was currently happening in it. She found the first of Jihun's men by nearly tripping over him. He was on the ground conscious, one hand pressed to his thigh. She dropped beside him. 2 seconds, no more. How bad, she said. Through and through, he said in accented English. I can move. Where is Jihun? He pointed. North section, deeper into the terminal. Toward the raised supervisor's platform she could see as a dark shape against darker dark. She moved. She stayed low and she stayed against surfaces and she moved the way she moved through a trauma bay in a crisis. Not running, because running was noise and panic, but fast in the deliberate way of someone who knows exactly where they're going and has committed to getting there. She heard Jihun before she saw him. Not his voice, his breathing, the specific labored quality she'd been monitoring for the last 6 hours, the sound of a man running a body past what the body had consented to provide. She tracked it through the dark until she found him. He was upright. That was the first thing. Against everything she'd calculated, against the fever and the torn sutures and the blood loss and the number of hours he'd been awake, he was upright, and he was moving. He had a weapon in his right hand and his left arm was pressed against his ribs, in the way she'd seen him do when the pain spiked past manageable, but his feet were under him and his eyes were tracking, and he was present in the way that mattered. Across the 20 feet of open floor between them and the platform, she could see the confrontation she'd been hearing. Taesung had two men engaged on the left flank. She could read from the pattern of movement that they were holding a position, covering. Two other men she didn't recognize were down. Dragon Crown, she assessed from their positioning relative to Jihun's. Cho was somewhere in the dark to the right. She could hear but not see him. And on the raised platform, in the cone of light thrown by a single industrial work lamp that someone had rigged on a pole, two men. Choi Min-seok she knew from description. Broad, heavy-built, the kind of physical presence that had a gravitational quality to it. He was standing with a stillness that matched Jihun's, the specific stillness of two people who have been heading toward each other for a long time and have finally arrived. The other man on the platform was the one that made her stomach drop. She had never seen his face, but the suit he was wearing, that particular cut, that particular quality, and the way he was standing with the careful distance of a man who considers himself above the room he's in, who has always had other people absorb the consequences of his decisions. She'd seen that posture in hospital boardrooms. She'd seen it in administrative offices when funding got cut. She'd spent 6 years watching people in suits like that decide things from a safe distance. The prosecutor, he was here. He had come to watch, or to confirm, or because he needed to see it finished with his own eyes and trust no one else's account of it. Jihun had not seen her yet. He was 6 feet to her left, moving toward the platform, and she could see from the angle of his approach that he intended to take the stairs at the east side. She reached out and caught his arm. He spun. Fast, the weapon coming up. And she was already inside the arc, her hand on his forearm before the motion completed. "It's me," she said. 3 seconds where neither of them moved. Then his arm came down, and he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him. Not relief, not surprise exactly, but something more complicated than both. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as the look she'd seen on patients who'd coded and come back and understood, in the first conscious moment, how close the margin had been. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was very low. "You're not supposed to be standing," she said. And yet, a beat. Something crossed his face, quick, involuntary, the trace evidence of a man who had spent so long managing everything about himself that the unmanaged moments were small and fast and gone before they could be named. "The drive," he said. She pressed her hand to her jacket, to the shape beneath it. "I have it," she said. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned back toward the platform. "Stay behind cover," he said. "Whatever you see, stay behind cover." She didn't agree or disagree. She moved. What happened next happened fast and then very slowly, the way extreme things always telescoped, compressed in the living and expanded in the remembering. Jihun took the east stairs. Min-seok saw him coming. She could tell from the way his posture changed. Not fear, nothing like fear, but the particular recalibration of a man who had expected to be dealing with a report of someone's death and was instead looking at the person himself. Standing, armed. Walking toward him with the deliberate pace of someone who had decided the distance between them was going to close no matter what stood between. The prosecutor moved back. 1 step, then 2, until he was at the edge of the platform's light. She noted that. The instinct of a man who had always stood at the edge of things and never in the middle. She found cover behind a stack of steel crating 30 feet from the platform's base. From here she could see the full picture. Taesung's men maintaining the perimeter below, Cho emerging from the dark on the right, and above them all, on the platform, the confrontation that 4 months of war had been building toward. She heard Min-seok speak, Korean, which she couldn't follow, but she could read the cadence of it, the particular rhythm of a man who still believes he controls the geometry of a situation. Measured, deliberate. The voice of someone who has won before and expects to win again. Jihun answered in Korean. She couldn't understand it, but she heard what was under it. Not anger, not posturing, something quieter and more final than both. The voice of a man who has moved past wanting to win and has arrived at simply needing this to end. Then Min-seok moved. He was faster than his size suggested. She registered that clearly, filed it as a data point, because even now her brain was doing the clinical thing, cataloging, assessing. He was fast and he was experienced, and he hit Jihun with the full weight of a man who had been doing this his entire adult life. What happened in the next 40 seconds was brutal in the specific, uncinematic way that real physical violence was brutal. Not choreographed, not clean, but the grinding, ugly work of two people trying to damage each other at close range. She watched it with her hand pressed flat against the crating and her jaw locked, and the drive pressed against her ribs, and she did not look away. Jihun took damage. She could see it, the impact to his left side that would have folded anyone not running on pure will, the way his breathing changed, the way he favored the injury and compensated with his right side and kept moving forward. He was slower than Min-seok. He was weaker than Min-seok tonight, by every clinical measure she could apply. He was still there, still upright, still pressing forward. Min-seok drove him back toward the platform railing, and Jihun hit it hard, the impact running through the whole structure, and she was on her feet without deciding to be. And that was when she saw the man she hadn't accounted for. He came from the darkness behind the industrial lamp, a sixth sense, or a shadow shift, or some animal awareness in the back of her skull, triggering before her eyes fully resolved the shape. Dragon crown. Flanking. Coming around the back of the platform toward the east stairs, toward the position nobody was watching because everyone was watching the confrontation in the light. Coming toward her, she had approximately 2 seconds. The medical kit bag was over her shoulder. She'd carried it from the safe house without thinking about it, the same way she'd grabbed the emergency flashlight in the compound's medical wing, the same way she kept cash in her running shoes. Her hands went into it and came out with the only thing in it that had the right properties. A full glass bottle of saline solution, sealed, dense, close to 1 kilogram of weight in a breakable container. She threw it. She'd played softball for 3 years in Atlanta. She hadn't thought about that in a decade. Her body remembered it without asking her brain for permission. The bottle caught the man at the base of the east stairs across the side of his head with the crack of breaking glass and the heavier sound of impact on bone. He went down. He didn't get up. The sound reached the platform. Min-seok's head turned, 1 fraction of a second, 1 degree of distraction, 1 moment where his attention divided between the man falling at the stairs and the man in front of him. Jihun didn't hesitate. She'd wondered in the abstract over the past 4 days, beneath the clinical assessment and the quarantine of irrelevant emotion, what kind of man Kang Jihun actually was. She'd seen the controlled version, the fevered version, the man who said her name with a weight that meant something. She'd constructed theories. She watched him move in that fraction of a second and understood that all her theories had been correct and incomplete at the same time, which was always the way of it with people who were too complicated for theories to fully hold. He was fast when it mattered. The confrontation ended at the railing of the platform, in the cone of the industrial lamp, without ceremony and without drama, and with the finality of something that had been heading toward this point for months. Min-seok went down. He didn't get back up. The terminal went still, not silent. She could still hear breathing, movement, the distant sound of the lake against the building's foundation. But the specific violence of the past several minutes drained out of the air like weather passing, and what was left was the aftermath, which always felt like a different country. Jihun stood at the railing. His left hand gripped it. His breathing was audible from 30 feet below. She watched him standing there in the harsh light, and she did the thing she always did. She assessed him, color, respiration rate, the quality of his balance. All of it worse than it should have been. All of it still above the threshold she needed it to stay above. Then she looked at the platform. The prosecutor had not run. She'd half expected him to. Instead, he was standing at the back of the platform in the same too careful posture she'd read from below. And he was looking at Min-seok on the ground. And even from here, she could see the specific expression on his face. The expression of a man who has just watched the instrument of his protection fail and is now calculating, rapidly and without access to good options, what comes next. Jihun turned to look at him. She couldn't see Jihun's face from this angle. She didn't need to. She reached into her jacket, her fingers closed around the drive. She walked to the east stairs, and she climbed them. Taesung called it in at 2:47 in the morning, not CPD, a federal contact he'd been maintaining independently, someone who existed outside the compromised channels, who received the drive's contents via encrypted transfer and the prosecutor's confirmation of location via a source Zuri never got the full details of and didn't press for. The arrest happened at 4:12 a.m. in the lobby of a hotel on East Wacker, before the man had managed to reach the flight he'd booked under a secondary identification. She found out about the arrest later. That night, she was occupied with other things. Jihun made it off the platform and down the east stairs into the terminal floor, and then his body presented its accounting. She'd been waiting for it, the moment when everything he'd been spending caught up to the balance. He sat down on the concrete floor because his legs made the decision without consulting him, and she was there, and she put her hands on him with the same focused economy she'd used for 4 days, checking, assessing, deciding what could wait and what couldn't. The sutures had held. She'd done good work. But the fever had climbed again during the exertion, the antibiotics not yet fully in control, and his blood pressure was telling her a number she responded to by flagging Tae-sung for immediate transport. "Hospital," she said. "No, not a negotiation." She kept her hands on him, one at his pulse, one at his side. "An actual hospital, with an actual surgical team and an actual ICU, if it comes to that. You've been running a critical infection for 6 hours on field treatment. You're done running it that way." He looked at her from the concrete floor with the expression she'd seen in glimpses throughout. The one that appeared when he'd run out of argument and knew it, and was deciding whether to concede or simply remain silent until the moment passed. "They'll have questions," he said. "I'll handle the questions," she said. "I've been handling questions my whole career. Lie down." He lay down. She folded her jacket and put it under his head. He looked at the ceiling of the terminal, at the structural steel beams lost in the dark above them, and she watched his breathing slow toward something more sustainable. And she thought about the past 4 days with the dissociated clarity that sometimes arrived after the crisis broke. The train, the subway platform, the hospital corridor, the cart, the drive across dark water, a key on a steel ring. "Zuri," he said, "still here." "Han." He said it quietly. Not a question exactly. An opening. She'd been thinking about this too. Since the boat. Since the moment Jihun had worked through what the credentials meant and where they'd come from and what that implied about where Han Jae-won actually was. "Tae-sung is looking," she said. "He's had people on it since we docked." A pause. "And?" She hesitated. 1 second, 2. "There's a warehouse in Pilsen," she said. "Tae-sung got a location from one of the Dragon Crown men in the terminal. Cho is on his way there now." She paused. "He was alive as of 6 hours ago. That's confirmed." Jihun closed his eyes. The movement was not relief. Not exactly. It was the specific exhale of a man releasing a weight he'd been carrying without knowing whether he had the right to release it. The weight of not knowing. "He was protecting you," she said. "When Yoon took his credentials, he didn't give them up willingly. You knew that. You said it on the boat." "I said it. I didn't let myself believe it until now." She kept her hand at his pulse. "You can believe it now." The sirens Tae-sung had called were still 5 minutes out. Around them, the terminal settled into its aftermath. The men who were standing, the men who were down being attended to, the particular silence of a space where something enormous had just finished. She looked around at it and thought about the compound on the lake, the medical wing she'd turned into a trap, the boat on the black water, the vault on Michigan Avenue. She thought about the moment she'd pressed the trigger. She had saved lives her entire career. That was specific, and it was clean, and she understood it. What she'd done in the compound's medical wing was not the same thing. It was the same instinct operating in a different context, producing a different kind of result, and she'd known that when she did it, and she'd done it anyway. She wasn't going to pretend that didn't sit in her in a complicated way. It did. It was going to for a long time. But she also wasn't going to pretend she would have made a different choice. That was a new thing to know about herself. She filed it in the same drawer as a lot of other things she'd learned in the past 4 days, in the company of a man who was currently lying on a concrete floor with her jacket under his head, and she thought about what honesty required of her, and decided that honesty could wait until the ambulance arrived. He was admitted under a name that wasn't his, to a hospital on the north side where the attending physician asked 3 pointed questions that Zuri answered with the combined authority of her nursing credentials, her clinical composure, and the specific expression she'd perfected over 6 years of advocating for patients in systems that didn't want to be complicated. He was in surgery for 2 hours. She waited. Tae-sung arrived in the hospital at 6 in the morning with 2 pieces of information. The first was that Han Jae-won was alive, injured, dehydrated, 2 days in a Pilsen warehouse that she chose not to form too detailed a picture of, but alive and now in the care of people who were loyal to Jihun in the particular way that loyalty held when it had been tested by something real. The second piece of information was that the federal arrest at the Wacker Hotel had triggered a cascade. Within 3 hours, the evidence on the drive had been received by 3 separate federal agencies via Tae-sung's contact, and the prosecutor's network of arrangements was beginning to surface the way these things surfaced, quickly and comprehensively, and with the specific energy of people in powerful positions trying to put distance between themselves and the person at the center of it. The Dragon Crown, without Min Seok and without their political protection, was already fracturing. These things move fast once they started. Tae-sung explained this to her in the hospital corridor in the tone of a man reporting operational outcomes, but underneath it she could hear the thing he wasn't performing, the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding something enormous for too long and was only now beginning to feel the weight of having put it down. "Go home," she told him. "Sleep." He looked at her. "Where are you going?" She nodded toward the surgical ward. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the care of a man choosing words precisely, "He's not an easy person. I know that." "He doesn't—" Tae-sung paused, tried again. "The people who stay in his life have needed to be very specific kinds of people." "What kind?" "The kind who don't leave when it gets complicated." He looked at her steadily. "And the kind he can't make leave by being difficult." She thought about a supply cart in a hospital corridor, about a boat on dark water, about a man handing her a key and a passphrase and not finishing the sentence he'd started with "whatever happens tonight." "Go home, Tae-sung," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. He nodded once, a slight, careful incline of the head that carried something more than its physical weight, and walked toward the elevator, and she watched him go. Jihun was out of surgery at 9:14 and in recovery by 10. She found the room, and she sat in the chair beside the bed, and she stayed there while the morning built itself outside the window, the February light coming in thin and gray over Chicago's north side, the hospital sounds doing their particular version of ordinary all around her, the monitors producing their steady green evidence of a body that had been through considerable and was still, against reasonable odds, persisting. He woke at 11:40. She was still there. He looked at her for a moment with the slow focus of someone returning from anesthesia, and she watched him orient, ceiling, window, monitors, her. The sequence of a man cataloging his environment before he said anything, even now, even coming out of surgery. "You stayed," he said. His voice was stripped to nothing, the hoarseness of the tube. "Yes." "You didn't have to." "I know." He looked at her. The morning light was better now, the sun having made some headway through the February overcast, and in it his face looked different than it had looked in the dark of the compound, the medical wing, the terminal. More specific, more human. "Han is alive," she said. His eyes closed, opened. "Tae-sung told me." "The prosecutor is in federal custody. The evidence has been received." She kept her voice even. "It's done." He looked at the window for a long moment. The light on the lake was beginning somewhere beyond the building she could see, the first real light of a day that had taken an enormous amount to arrive at. "The car," he said. She didn't understand at first. Then she did. From the outline, from what she knew was supposed to come next in whatever version of this story he'd been carrying in his head. The car that would take her anywhere she wanted, the end of obligation, the formal release. "Is there a car?" she asked. "There can be, if you want one." He turned his head on the pillow to look at her directly. His eyes were the same as they'd always been. Dark, precise, missing nothing. Only now there was less in them that was hidden, and the things that were visible were more specific. "You can go anywhere. You kept your end of everything you never agreed to be part of. No one would—" "Stop telling me what I can do," she said. "I know what I can do." He held her gaze. "What do you want to do?" he said. Quiet. The real question. She looked at him, at this man who was not simple and was not safe, and was not the uncomplicated kind of person a life could be built around without significant cost. And she knew all of that, had known most of it since the second night when Tae-sung had said the words, "Black Tiger Syndicate," and she'd understood with the full clarity of an intelligent woman exactly what she'd walked into. She also knew that he had handed her a key on a boat in the dark and trusted her with the only thing he hadn't been able to protect himself. She knew that he'd set her name in a hospital corridor with a weight that had landed somewhere below her sternum and hadn't left. She knew that she had spent 4 days in the most extreme circumstances she'd ever encountered and had discovered, in the middle of them. Not her limits, but their absence. The thing you only find out about yourself when everything else has been stripped away, and what remains is what you actually are. She reached out and put her hand over his. Not the clinical hold, not fingers on a pulse point, not pressure on a wound, just her hand on his hand, on top of the white hospital blanket, in the morning light. "I haven't taken a day off in 4 months," she said. He looked at her hand, then at her face. "The hospital is going to have questions," she said, "about where I've been, about my apartment, about a supply cart that apparently took out a man in a hospital corridor a few days ago." She paused. "I'm going to have to be very creative." Something happened in his face. The ghost she'd seen before, the trace evidence of a man who had once known how to do something with his face other than control it, returned, and this time it stayed longer. "I'm good at creative," she said. "I've noticed," he said. She left her hand where it was. He turned his hand over under hers slowly, and his fingers closed around hers and stayed there, warm and certain, the grip of someone who had decided to hold something carefully because it mattered, and not because it was required. Outside the window, the February sky was doing something it rarely did in Chicago in winter. The overcast was breaking, not dramatically, not in the way of movies with sudden shafts of golden light and transformation declared from above. Just the slow retreat of gray, the tentative arrival of blue, the specific quality of light that meant the worst of the cold had passed its peak, and the world was, by increments, beginning to reconsider. She watched it. He watched her watch it. The monitors ran their steady evidence. The hospital went about its business. Somewhere across the city, in federal holding, a prosecutor was answering questions he had spent 18 months ensuring would never be asked. Somewhere in a Northside apartment, Tai-sung was finally sleeping. Somewhere, Han Jae-won was being looked after by people who understood what his survival meant. The war was over. Not cleanly, not without cost. The cost was specific and real, and some of it would never be fully calculated. The lives that had bent toward this without choosing to, the years that Han Jae-won had spent inside a loyalty that had nearly killed him, the particular damage done to people who had been in the radius of other people's power and had not had the option to step away. She held all of that. She didn't set it down or simplify it. She also held his hand. The blue kept coming in at the edges of the window, the gray receding in the way of things that have been holding too long and have finally reached their limit. She felt the morning on her face and felt his pulse under her fingers and thought about a subway train at 11:47 at night and a stranger in a black cashmere coat who had said stop apologizing in a way that had landed somewhere below her clavicle and stayed. "Jihun," she said. "Yes." "When you're cleared for discharge." He waited. "I want to see the lake," she said. "The real one. Not from inside a compound." She glanced at him. "I've been next to it for 4 days, and I haven't actually seen it." He was quiet for a moment. The look on his face was the most unguarded she'd seen yet. No performance, no management, no controlled surface. Just a man in a hospital bed in morning light, looking at a woman who had come into his life through an act of exhausted accident and had refused at every subsequent point to be anything other than exactly what she was. "I know a place," he said. "Of course you do." The ghost of the almost smile again. This time it made it all the way. She turned back to the window and let the morning come in, and he held her hand, and neither of them said anything else for a while, because some things that have been through fire don't need to be explained. They need only to be allowed to rest in the light and breathe and continue. The waiting car, whenever it came, would drive away without her. She had already decided that. She had decided it on a subway platform, standing longer than she needed to, watching a train disappear into a tunnel and not quite knowing yet what she was deciding. Now she knew. It was enough. Pi Diam.